Welcome to GONKCAST, a long-form discussion podcast about the music of English electronic duo Autechre, album by album, EP by EP. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And this episode, we're moving on to 2016 and the album that made XI seem quaint before NTS made it seem quaint 2 years later, Autechre's 4-hour-long 12th LP, Elseq 1 through 5. We thought long and hard about breaking this album into multiple episodes, but we decided that something is lost when you don't experience Elseq in all its glory. At the same time, though, we want to give each installment its due one by one, so basically, buckle your seatbelts. This might go on for a while. First, I want to mention, as always, that we've worked as many of your emails as possible into this episode, but we'll get to the rest on a bonus episode next week. That means you've still got plenty of time to tell us what you think about Elseq 1 through 5. GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. Our next proper episode 2 weeks from now will be on the NTS sessions. This one we might actually split into 2 episodes, but start sending us your opinions on the whole thing. Again, GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. All right, Dan, what background info do we need to know about Elseq 1 through 5?
Autechre released Elseq with basically no warning on May 19th, 2016. The first track, Feed 1, was played on BBC Radio 6 a week earlier, and the second track, C16 Deep Tread, was played on an Alaskan student radio station on the 18th. But it's safe to say that no one expected this 5-part, 4-hour-long juggernaut. Elseq made headlines for shattering the traditional album format. Several tracks approached 30 minutes in length, and it was never released on a physical medium, making it the only digital exclusive among AE's studio LPs. In a 2016 interview, one of the few the guys did for this surprise release, Sean says, Rob and I have been back and forth with this thing quite a bit, and it's become this enormous thing, and we don't know how to frame it or what it is. We don't know if it's an album or a collection of EPs or albums or just things. We have no idea what this actually is. He goes on to note that they always try to, quote, compile something that gives you a feeling from start to end. And they always think about the medium, but in this case, the medium was the AE store, which gave them the opportunity to engage with new listening habits. Rob says that they were inspired by kids on SoundCloud who upload 50 tracks in a day, as well as TV directors who recognize that some people will have a gap of a week between episodes, while others will binge watch it throughout a weekend.
Yeah, as one might expect, reception to Elseq was fairly mixed. The Wire loved it, claiming breaking from the traditional album format has liberated the UK's most rigorous electronic duo. And Resident Advisor was also enthusiastic, calling it among the most uncompromising, impressive, and enjoyable collections released by Rob Brown and Sean Booth. Pitchfork, on the other hand, rated each part in the 6.6 to 7.1 range, and I think was trying to make fun of the project when they said it, quote, advanced the argument for Autechre as a post-human jam band. That sounds awesome to me personally. Critic Piero Scaruffi actually summed up the negative reactions pretty well when he wrote, Elseq feels like a collection of leftovers, of tentative and unfinished compositions, of experiments to be continued. Fans on Rate Your Music have given the whole collection a 3.67, putting it roughly in classic territory, though if you average the ratings of the individual releases, it comes out to a 3.47. On that note, Elseq 4 is rated the highest at a 3.67, then Elseq 1 at a 3.5, then Elseq 5 at a 3.48, then Elseq 3 at a 3.43, and the last is Elseq 2 at a pretty dismal 3.28. I know that was a lot of numbers all at once. Sorry about that. What, though, is your sense, Dan, of Elseq's current reputation among fans?
I feel like, people love it. I spend most of my time in the Autechre community on our Autechre on Reddit, and it seems like everyone there is pretty fond of it. But also, now that I think about it, that's sort of like the first album that came out like while that subreddit was like really kind of big and populated, so maybe it's just like partially that. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it's pretty much a fan's record. I don't think you see a lot of people who only like Elseq. That's the only Autechre they know. I feel like if you dig into a 4-hour record, you're probably already a fan. But it seems like I feel like I never see anyone shit talking it or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a weird kind of place in the discography, I think, because it wasn't around for very long before NTS came out. It wasn't like, didn't really feel like we had enough time, not to mention like the second batch of AE Live, which came out just a year later. It's like as a community, the fans did not really have enough time to like digest Elseq, I think. And then all of a sudden NTS became like the big mammoth, like biggest album ever. And it just feels like Elseq maybe gets a little forgotten, but then at the same time, for that reason, maybe it feels like fans have this kind of like special relationship to it. Like it's almost this hidden gem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. Because you're right. Especially it essentially being 5 albums. That's the kind of thing that a normal band that was even kind of quick would take 5 years or so to release 5 albums. So to digest that so quickly and then be thrown all those AE lives on top, and then thrown NTS even on top of that, and then another batch of AE lives really does I think obscure it a little bit.
Yeah, it almost feels like the dust still hasn't settled on Elseq. But what is your previous history with it?
I was a big fan of Autechre by the time this came out. Like I said, it was sort of the first one, like when I feel like at least I was hanging out in the Autechre and everything, on Reddit. So it feels like a little communal in that sense. But I enjoyed it from the get go. It was such this like mammoth thing. It was like fun to attempt to digest it, and I just felt like I for so long was discovering new parts of it. I mean, even up until doing this podcast, it's just so much to digest all at once.
Yeah, I feel like I might be sort of putting some of my personal history onto what I see as like the fan response, which is just that it came out, I adored it. I mean, I was blown away. I was like hugely inspired for reasons we'll get into. And in fact, it was kind of funny because it like dropped sort of by surprise at a time when I was visiting Florida and hanging out with you a lot, and we were like working on music together, and it was just like I was cannibalizing it as fast as I could, and like writing down like gotta rip that off, gotta rip that off. But I also feel like I've never gotten to spend an adequate amount of time with it. And I'll say, spoiler alert, even 2 weeks of listening to nothing but it over and over again, I still don't feel like I've spent enough time with it. But it's just all of that, like how much stuff kept coming out in the years after, that it just feels like, I don't know, I was looking forward to like spending 2 weeks with Elseq, because it just does kind of feel like this thing that, I don't know, I never have really gotten the time to like sift all the way through. I'm thinking we should spend a little time on the big picture here before diving into the individual installments, and then maybe circling back to the project as a whole, though if we do a good job of like zooming in and out consistently, that would be great. As always is the case with these like gigantic releases, I think it's all right if the conversation gets a little bit messy. But that being said, how would you describe the overall sound of Elseq, if that's possible? What sound palette are Autechre working with here?
Yeah. It's hard to distill down, basically 5 records, 4 hours into, a sentence or two. But I think that quote you read from Pitchfork, which, like you said, I think they're trying to poke fun, but I agree with you. It's kind of good. This is sort of like Autechre at their most jammy. We've joked about them being, the Grateful Dead of electronic music and stuff. And I think like this is sort of like where I kind of make that joke from. It is sort of like the sounds of Elseq. Everything's not polished or distilled down. I mean, obviously, like some of the tracks here are pushing 30 minutes and everything. Everything's just got this room to breathe. As for the sound palette, it feels like we're working with something similar to AE Live. I mean, obviously, like some of the tracks from Elseq are actually played during that, and we'll get into it. But it sort of sounds like a similar, very Max MSP, like heavy kind of thing made with similar sort of palette of sounds. What would you add?
Yeah, I mean, I think AE Live is the obvious starting point, and by that I mean like pretty aggressive, like abrasive, grinding kind of metallic sounds, but also just a ton of like physical modeling type sounds, like clanging metal, like ringing out in a room or something, like tons and tons of that. And yet it's a little different from AE Live in that it feels, it feels like strangely sparse for the most part. Like it's very skeletal almost. There is a lot of like heavy low end. I mean, there's just such like weight to the tracks here, I feel like. it's going to sound pretentious as hell if you've never listened to Elseq, but I can't imagine anybody's listening to this episode if they haven't listened to Elseq. But like, it sounds like everything is on this kind of cosmic scale. Like, you know how like you watch those videos like on Reddit or whatever, and it'll be like a GIF that shows like, okay, Jupiter is pretty big, but look how big like this star is or whatever. Like Jupiter is actually really small. It's like, it feels like even the tiny sounds here are really, really big. You know, it's just they're tiny in proportion to like the huge blown out low end and stuff. Do you kind of get what I mean? Like, it just feels like kind of slow moving and skeletal, but also huge at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, huge is a great descriptor for it, and not just, you know, the length and everything. Like just the physical like sounds in the tracks are huge. Like you said, it's different in respect to AE Live in that way, and I think like maybe, you know, that has to do with like what AE Live, you know, it was built for being live, you know, playing, you know, to a crowd, and I think like this is, you know, built for you know, the album or the you know, the home listening, at least, since they're not even sure if this is an album or anything. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like you know, cosmically large is a good descriptor.
Yeah, and I think that's like totally accurate. Which is, it feels like if they took sort of the sounds of AE Live, which was very dense and very like pummeling and just like relentless and sort of meant to like hit you in the gut, as we were talking about, and they just sort of twisted it so that it was more for like headphone listening or something.
Yeah.
It's more just like there are so many little details to sort of sift out, which was different from AE Live. It didn't necessarily like reward that kind of like meticulous, you know, poring over every little nook and cranny. Here it kind of does, and it gives you that kind of like space to actually single things out and identify little sounds and things, where AE Live was just like so densely packed, it didn't really have that opportunity. You know, we had listener Tyler wrote in to say, it's amazing how much the line between rhythm and melody is blurred throughout the album. You know, I agree with that on one hand, but on the other hand, I kind of think of this album as like blurring the line between noise and melody. You know, it feels like getting back to the idea of AE Live, which was so noisy, almost power electronics in so many places. It feels like it takes those sounds and actually somehow digs a lot of like beauty out of pure noise. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. You know, this record, you know, Elseq as a whole, like really does blend like those really noisy. I mean, there's so many sounds that are like, you know, just so distorted or blown out or, you know, just blown up. But at the same time, there is like a lot of you know, sort of like nice pads and everything going on too. It really, I think it's such a great like blending of, you know, those two kind of things. I mean, because you mentioned like power electronics and noise and stuff, like, you know, I dig some of that stuff, but you can only listen to it for so long, you know.
Yeah,
and I think here with like Elseq, you know, it's allowing you to like hear those kind of sounds, like, but also in a you know, almost more enjoyable kind of way. Like it's mixed with this melody to make it like you know, where you can listen to 4 hours of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think just what was so inspiring to me when I first heard this is that they are, you know, like when I listen to, let's say, noise or like drone or any of these kind of like non-musical type of genres, what I want something more than just noise. Like I want to find music in noise is kind of like my personal taste. And I like when you listen to like, let's say drone or something, and what you hear, you know, it's supposed to be like sort of still and just suspended like walls of sound. But if you listen deep into it, you hear like all this pulsating and all this like kind of rhythmic, you know, activity going on. Or if you listen to noise, like you listen real close, you hear all of that same kind of like pulsating. And sometimes you even hear like, you know, what you could call melody sort of like emerging from the feedback, all twisting and tangling around each other. You know what I mean? It feels like this album is about like mining noise for those kind of interesting things that one can find beneath noise.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So we kind of already started to do this, but I wonder if we can attempt to describe the kind of track structures we get here. Because even though there's plenty of differences between tracks, it does seem like we're in new and distinct territory as far as like looseness and jamminess goes, as you were saying. A long time ago when listener AT was helping us understand how Max MSP works, he described Elseq as long jams on a single patch. And listener Colin wrote in to say that he loves the looseness of the compositions, adding each track explores its own little sound world without being bound by any physical time constraints, building, collapsing, and morphing in such incredible ways. So what do you think when you hear the songs on this, record? Does it sound like the tracks have any kind of structure at all? And how would you describe it?
Kind of not. Remember, I can't remember what episode it was, but we read like that. I think it was maybe Choristus. We read that quote where one of them said that they like to make these just like hour-long versions of like a loop, just kind of let it run. It sort of feels like that. It sort of feels like we've. Not that we've just let the loop run, left the room, and we'll come back in 30 minutes, but it's this jamming on a singular sort of patch in MSP. So because of that, I don't want to say that it doesn't have any structure, because I think saying no structure would just imply that it is just like literally random noise or something. Each track has like a melody or a place it's at. It's just it's not really like traveling from place to place most of the time. There's some exceptions like ELYC6 onset, like that one sort of takes you on a there's sort of a point A to point B sort of thing. But I think overall throughout the all 5 discs, mostly we're just sort of like in these jams that like they shift. They're not, some of them are like very minimal and almost looping, but most of them like move somewhere. It's just not like a predetermined place they're getting to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I started to feel like it's not true all the time, as you mentioned, but for the most part I felt like I was listening to a patch rather than a composition, like almost like a non-linear track, where it's just like, it basically, like, you could listen to it for 3 minutes or you could listen to it for 30 minutes, and it's just like, it's not going to like grow or move anywhere or anything, but it's just like, I almost started to wonder if they played it, indefinitely, like you kind of mentioned how they like to just put on some sort of like patch and just like hear it as they're tidying up or doing other stuff around the house, I guess. And they like kind of put it on, and then they were like, all right, it takes 20 minutes for me to enjoy listening to every little thing, or like to explore this in kind of like a non-linear way, but in more of like a painting kind of way. For me to look at every little part of it, it takes 20 minutes. So this track will be 20 minutes. You get what I'm saying? Like it's not moving. It's like just the whole thing is blown wide open and you can just kind of walk around in it.
Yeah, I think walk around in it is a good descriptor. Cause you're right. Especially some of the more out there kind of tracks, it never feels like, oh, I get why that was 20 minutes. That was the ending. Like it needed to end.
Right.
It just sort of feels like, they decided to end it there. I was sort of thinking like, me myself, like whenever I make like music, I usually like will think of something that I like or whatever, and then I just basically like let it play for a really long time. You tweak it as it's played, like sort of a jam like that, and then have to distill down to make it like an actual track or something. But I feel like they almost skip that distill part, and we just get like that like a snapshot of that jam process. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's really interesting, both from like a how they work kind of way and a listening sort of way. It's just I think it's the same reason people enjoy jam music. Like I really like I can't find much of a difference in like these long jammy tracks here, and then listening to. See,
I'm kind of like, I decided that I don't like calling it jammy actually, because it feels so non-linear in that way. Like it feels like the song is, because Max MSP, from what I understand, it's not like I'm an expert or anything, but it's like a visual sort of programming setup. You know, it's like it's very visual, and you're sort of like connecting things and drawing things together, and it feels like they work for so long on making this like meticulous, like almost like a painting, right? Where it's just like you see how all these like oscillators and sequencers and all this stuff is all like rigged together in the most like complicated way, and there's lots of conditionals and stuff where it's like if this happens then this happens some of the time, and then that affects this and blah blah blah. So they set up this whole like, you know, ecosystem, and then that is the track, is like that thing. And it's just like you could listen to it for almost any amount of time. And maybe some of the tracks that kind of grow and change and evolve and like morph around, maybe it's just the fact that if you, because of the conditionals they set up, it's like eventually the thing is going to fizzle out, or eventually it's going to like, you know, just implode on itself or something like that. But it just feels like this static, unmoving thing. I don't feel like they're tweaking in real time, but I mean, it's just a guess.
I guess, you know, I didn't really think about like conditionals. You know, I sort of took like the changes to be, you know, like a person doing it. But you could be right. You know, I didn't really think about that, you know, part of the software. I mean, if that's the case, like, so do you think like the computer is basically performing this? You know, I mean, we got into this a little bit on one of the earlier episodes, but you know, like did they just basically compose, you know, this patch, and then, you know, it playing, you know, it plays it, so, you know, they're the conductor here rather than the performer.
That's kind of how I think of it, yeah, because it feels like they've like meticulously set it up, and then there are going to be sort of strange chance events and stuff that happen, and I bet they record like hours and hours and hours, but then they kind of pick like favorite sections or segments or whatever, and I'm sure they change things like depending on certain behaviors that the thing has. But this whole record just gives me the vibe of like something sort of created and then just let to live, you know, on its own or something. And, you know, I don't have any like problem with that. I mean, maybe some people would say like, oh, that's not performance, but yeah, you're right. It's more of like being a conductor. And honestly, it is absolutely bold to me to like make non-linear music. You know, I mean, that like Autechre hasn't even really done that before. I think this is like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's pretty like wild.
Yeah. I wish I had thought about that, you know, earlier, because like I said, I just sort of the whole time I was always sort of thinking at it from the way that any sort of changes were being made in real time, you know, by them.
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we should be clear that we don't know the actual answer, which, you know, would be nice. But I guess nobody knows except, you know, old Rob and Sean. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a super interesting thing. I would have no problem with it. You know, it's a very you know, John Cage kind of, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's totally cool. And it just sounds like kind of, it just has like this kind of post-human feel where it's just like no humans are in the room or something like that. But you know, listener Tyler writes, it's a bit striking to me that despite digital music being a popular medium for years up to this point, this is the first time the AE really threw traditional song lengths out the window, with the exception of Perlin's subrange 636, but somehow that feels different to me. Almost every track on this album is a behemoth, which makes it feel impenetrable and almost excessive. You know, it is interesting because I feel like Perlin's it's like an hour because it's like meant to fill a disc, you know, it's like the last disc of Quadrange. Like that's why it is as long as it is. Here they're not limited by that, and yet it's interesting how I don't know, it's kind of designed to be like, it's almost suspicious to me how each installment is almost the same length, somewhere between 45 and 50 minutes. You know, it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like they're not bound by physical medium, but it does feel like I said, it's like non-linear tracks. You could almost listen for any amount of time. And some of these tracks, I would be happy to sit in them for like another 30 minutes, you know? And it's like, it feels almost like it's just cut off because they were trying to make it fit into like these little packages. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. Because, you know, a lot of like, you know, things people talk about in regards to Elseq is like this, you know, embracingness of the you know, digital medium and it not mattering how long things are. But, you know, they do that. But you're right, they still do kind of think about it, because, you know, each of these discs is around, you know, 45, 50-ish minutes, which is like a normal album kind of length. Yeah. You know, like all of these discs individually would very easily fit on a CD. Most of them would fit on a record, except that maybe not in the way the track, the track order might have to get shuffled, but it would fit. So I do sort of like, I've thought about that before, before even this podcast. Like, I wonder if they maybe sort of were thinking of making it like a box set kind of thing, and then for some reason, maybe Warp think it would be too expensive, it wouldn't sell or something, and then, but it's strange, because then they do it with NTS, and I imagine that sold fine. So you kind of think like, oh, if that worked, why don't they go back and do Elseq? So it's strange because if they're truly just throwing it out the window, like why is this split into 5 sections?
Right. I mean, if you read like interviews around this time, they kind of mention like the AE store being exciting because it's really annoying to them how they have to like complete something, and then there's this whole process of actually like making records and like packaging and all that shit. And like they complained about how XI was like, a full year old before they were even starting the press thing, and they were on to other stuff and then had to like talk about it in interviews like it was like new and exciting or something like that. And so, that might be the fun part of the digital aspect of this, and like why they wanted it to be digital only, because then they could just like maybe put it up much faster or something. There isn't that whole bureaucratic process. But it does seem like they are still kind of rooted in like the traditional forms, and this is obviously something we'll talk about a lot more moving forward. But I think it works, because I do think it's still bold and adventurous how these are like essentially nonlinear tracks, and their length is just kind of determined by like the size of the portrait, like how much there is to look at and stuff like that. And that's why I think the length is, it's not like they're like exploring like huge like prog rock style like evolving kind of like it's just like big landscapes or something like that, and like plenty of time to dig through them. On that note, we should talk for just a second about the visual aesthetic of this album, and again, individualized artwork for each release, as was the case with AE Live. What do you think of it? Does it like suit the sound and the vibe here for you?
Yeah, I love these artworks. All 5 of them. I think they're maybe my favorite Autechre album covers. They're just like so cool. I like how there is an individual one for each record. It's slightly different, but not entirely. Like it's hard to remember which one's which, without seeing the title next to it or anything. It's just, I think it does fit the music. It's just like, it gives no hint to like any humanity or any like there's no clue.
It's interesting, right? Because like Oversteps, the whole point of that was that like a human can't draw a perfect circle, but a computer, it's very easy. And now we have like actually perfect generated circles.
No, exactly. Yeah, it just feels like so like inhuman, and I don't know, it's just really neat artwork. I really dig them.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like very minimal and sparse in the way that I think of the music, and also very like sort of post-human in the sense of like these kind of perfect circles and squares and things. And it I don't know, it sort of like speaks, I think, to the like, it complements the AE Live artwork in an interesting way, which is like similar but like kind of shattered, like more geometrical patterns and stuff. And these are like, I don't know, more globular and just sort of like something, I don't know, it just sort of speaks to the difference between the two of them. Like, I feel like if you put both up, I would be like, yeah, that one looks more like AE Live and that one looks more like Elseq. If for some reason I had no idea what it looked like. Listener Tyler asks, do you think there's any rhyme or reason to which variation of the album art was assigned to which Elseq? They are all variations on the same idea, but do you think there's any reason why some of them have more circles than others, why the sizing of the shapes differs, etc.? I'm trying to find meaning in this, but maybe there is none. I don't think I can. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. Didn't we read like from Designers Republic like how like the Autechre like just sort of like gave them sort of an idea, like they didn't really like listen to the it wasn't like, this sounds like Choristus to me. It was sort of like through descriptions and stuff that like Autechre what they wanted, like it was a collaborative sort of thing. So I think it's just maybe they were like, this is a cool sort of theme, and then maybe there's some sort of hidden code in it, but
Yeah.
It is funny that Elseq 4 is the only one that doesn't have 4 shapes on it. Like it has 3.
That is funny.
So that's a little funny. It does remind me like I have like an electron sampler, and like when you adjust like the delay, it's like these little bubbles that look a lot like these kind of, but then it gets like bigger as you do more. So it does sort of like remind me about that, but I have like the cheap, crappy one that I'm sure that they're not using. So probably coincidence.
I mean, I kind of wonder if like, without knowing really for sure at all, but like I just wonder if, I was describing how Max MSP is visual. I wonder if this is kind of like an approximation of what those patches look like. You know what I mean? Obviously like simplified greatly, but just like
that could
little things linked together. I mean, it's just wonderful, but it's wonderful for how abstract it is and how I think it will keep us Autechre fans looking for answers where there almost certainly is none to be found. All right. We've touched on it a little bit, but it might be useful to talk about how Elseq relates to Autechre's earlier work already, maybe starting with AE Live. Listener Joe wrote in to object to the popular theory that Elseq is short for edited live sequences, saying, after listening through ungodly amounts of the 2015 live sets, it seems like there's far less material on here that has obvious roots in that live set than one would imagine, and that none of the 5 installments feel like they would make sense as a live set. So what do you think of that theory? Doesn't Elseq sound more like unedited live sets to you? And maybe we can make a final call on what we were discussing last episode about whether AE Live was like the laboratory where Autechre tested and developed the sounds that would become Elseq.
Well, like we talked about a little bit earlier in the episode, I think that like AE Live like really sounds like it was for the live experience, whereas Elseq sounds like it's for the headphone experience. So I do agree with the listener, like that these don't particularly feel like live sets or anything. And I do also agree that this is sort of unedited live sequences, except that that maybe they mean edited in the sense that like it went on for 2 hours and we only gave you 30 minutes of it or something. It's hard to say. Also, like Elseq might just be some crazy word they thought up and has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, I think it's interesting how like it does feel like AE Live is like very tight and it's very like it's moving from one thing to the other, and this just feels like the idea gets like totally stretched out, and it doesn't have, I mean, we'll talk about it, but like so much attention to like consistent flow or anything necessarily. Doesn't at all sound like it would make sense as a live set to me. But it does feel like I said, like the sounds of AE Live got further explored for closer listening reasons. Joe makes a few other comparisons, calling Elseq a higher resolution next-gen expansion of the XI universe, and saying XI is an N64 game like Ocarina of Time, blocky, low-res, a bit glitchy, but chock full of twists, turns, and iconic moments that make it beloved. Elseq is like Twilight Princess. It's based on the same blueprint and revisits many of the same ideas and expands on them, adding a unique take on them. Overall, Twilight Princess is far more high-res and impressive looking, but that doesn't necessarily make it a better game than Ocarina of Time. I don't know if this analogy speaks to you at all, Dan, but what do you think of that?
No, it doesn't, because I've never played any of those games. But I guess I get that. I get what he's saying. I don't know that I particularly agree. I see, like, a lot of people like kind of compare this to XI and everything, and I think it's just basically, XI got so big and then this got bigger. But it doesn't feel like this is like, I don't know. To me, it doesn't feel like they're like, oh, let's do, XI bigger. If anything, I feel like more of a connection with like Choristus in this. But I guess I understand what the listener's saying.
Yeah, I get what he means, because XI was like dirtier, like grimier around the edges. I mean, this is definitely like high def. It's like definitely blown out. I mean, the lows are just so booming and so huge, and there's so much like space. I mean, I feel like a good descriptor of the sound on this record is like the name of the third to last track here, Space is How. I'm like constantly like, these spaces fucking how, because it is just so spacious, whereas I felt like XI was like very dense. So I can understand like seeing it as kind of a just like super high res version of XI, and it does feel like it shares some similarities with the kind of like rhythmic focus of XI, as I'm sure we'll discuss more. Like the kind of like there's the skeleton of the track, and then there's all the like stuff going on like that's what you listen to is like the textures and everything. I mean, has like a stillness that a lot of XI tracks has. Joe also calls it the opposite of chorustus, since if chorustus was long jams edited down, Elseq is, quote, the fully developed idea taken just about as far as it can possibly go on every track. I thought that was kind of an interesting point, because it does seem like the opposite of trying to edit down at all, like actually stretching it as far as it can go.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said, like, this sort of reminds me of chorustus a bit more than XI. It's basically that, it's like an expansion upon the ideas of, like, chorustus, because you're right, or the listener's right, those were long jams edited down, and I feel like they've taken the opportunity of, like, digital medium and everything, and not had to do, so much of that editing, and just kind of giving you the full idea. With chorustus, they gave different packages with different versions of it all, so you could sort of make your own kind of thing. And here it's like they sort of just giving you like the one version, but like the full version of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree a lot, actually. Listener Tyler sent this huge list of what he considers intentional callbacks to Autechre's earlier work. For example, he says Easter is Hub's older brother, ACDWN2 would fit on Untilted, Fold Free Casual reminds him of VI Sco's Poise, etc., etc. And he says, maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, but this album really does seem to take a lot of their older sounds and update them by 10 to 15 years, whereas most Autechre albums, in my mind, have very little in common with their predecessors. Is it possible some of these are actually old ideas that Autechre revisited? I'm not saying that this is actually how the tracks originated, but if Booth and Brown were to come out and say so, I wouldn't be terribly surprised. Either way, I'm curious why this album has so many callbacks to older albums. I'm a little bit torn about this, because Elseq, like, I almost feel the opposite, that they're like often sort of calling back and like reworking things. And then Elseq to me feels like almost the first album where it's like, this is a completely new frontier. Like, there's just like, they've taken some huge step forward or something. And yet I do think it's a fact of the matter that when they get into like these kind of bigger data dump type releases, they are revisiting stuff. Like, we'll talk about it when we get there, but there's stuff on NTS that is like kind of reworking and like revisiting, I think, like literally patches from Elseq and stuff. So I don't know. Did you ever get that impression that there were like a lot of callbacks on this album?
I sort of agree with you. This Elseq does feel like a new frontier, like a new, like this is definitely like a different, era of Autechre or whatever, like we've tried to, break apart and stuff. I do hear some sounds, that remind me of like other sounds. I can't remember what song it is on Elseq or which song it reminds me of because the stupid names, but, it might be something from Incunabula. Remember, it's like it has that like car horn, like dun, 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 something on Elseq like has sort of that car horn for a second, and that like it kept like making me think of that track.
Latent Call, I think.
It is Latent Call.
Yeah.
So there was like little moments like that, but I was never like, oh, this sounds like whatever, a Confield song or something, you know what I mean? Yeah,
there were some sounds that sounded like really twisted, like Max MSP patches that reminded me like of the end of Confield, Lentic Catacresis, where that like goes like wild and speeds up and everything. So it's just like a Max MSP patch, like Push Too Far or something. There was stuff on there. I mean, there also, I feel like there's a lot of stuff on this record that's like very short loops or something, which sort of reminds me of like the tri-repete style, where it's like the melody that they give you is so minimal, but it's kind of like endlessly fascinating because of just how short and like circular it is. I feel like, the melody here is light, but it's like, I don't know, it's got that like instant, just that instant like transfixing quality from tri-repete. Did you ever feel like that?
Yeah, I can feel that.
Well, I want to do one last bit of big picture stuff here by trying to answer Sean's question about what this actually is. I think we'll probably circle back to this once we've gone through all the parts. Listener Jordan wrote in to say, what is Elseq? Is it an album, a data dump, a compilation? Whatever you want to call it, Elseq is undeniably music in its purest form. He says he loves Elseq because it made him question what an album actually is and that it challenges the traditional album format. He writes, Autechre were always enthusiastic about music listening habits, and with Elseq, they were embracing music streaming. He adds, not every album has to be a concise, less than an hour thematic experience. Some albums are just a bunch of songs. No one is forcing you to listen to the whole thing. Not every album has to flow or have consistency. An album can just be about the music. An album can be eclectic and all over the place, just like Elseq, or should I say eclectisec. I'm not sure that pun totally works, but I take
it works better when you read it. I'll give him that.
So what is Elseq, and like how are we supposed to listen to it?
It's basically a question I feel like I've been trying to figure out since this was released. I've talked about it tons of times on this podcast. I am one of those people. I think an album, like I disagree with a lot of what this listener said. Like I think an album does need to be like a piece of work meant to listen to the whole thing. And as I always said, you wouldn't just watch one scene of a movie. You watch the whole movie. You don't look at one corner of a painting. You look at the whole painting. But Elseq like really does challenge that, because I mean, surely nobody expects you to listen to 4 hours of music all in one sitting every time you're going to listen to this. And then also, like Autechre themselves, they've broken this into 5 pieces. So is it 5 albums? Is it an album made of 5 different pieces? Which I guess that's fine. Like you could think of that as like, I don't know what it would be called with 5, but like a trilogy, but with 5. Like you don't have to watch all 3 Godfathers in a row. You could take a break in between them or whatever. But then also like on Rate Your Music, it's like they don't even know, because they've got each individual Elseq listed under albums, and then under compilations is like Elseq as a whole, Elseq 1 to 5. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
I came to decide. I think I used to kind of feel more like the listener Jordan, and that it was just like kind of a smattering of random tracks, and I almost kind of felt like they are not assembled in any way other than to just make each one about 45 minutes long. Like I really used to think that, but like having spent so much time with it the past 2 weeks, I feel like it's a 4-hour album. Like I really have come down on that. Maybe I'll try to prove it like with evidence as we like walk through the parts, but it's like I feel like it almost doesn't make sense unless you go like from the first track to the last track. And I kind of feel like basically if you wanted a good description of this, it's like we're going to go from feed 1, the most like abrasive like noise blast possible, and we're going to end up on like Oneium or whatever, the last track of Elseq 5, which is just like this just glistening like wall of strings. We're going to go from that to that, and it's going to make sense somehow. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's going to make sense. While you're in the middle of it, it's not going to make any sense. It's going to be like a long, winding, meandering, weird path. But when you look back at the end of Oneium, you're going to be like, I get it. I get how we got from feed 1 to this.
Yeah,
you know what I
mean? I totally agree, because I sort of felt the same way early on, that it did feel like random and sort of just put together to make these albums that are all sort of the same length, but it really isn't. I feel like each, and we'll get to it as we break each record down, but each one like I feel like has a certain mood, and it really does like sort of work on a journey, though a meandering one, from 1 to 5. Because you're right, we somehow make it from feed 1 all the way to Oneium, and if you just put those 2 songs on back to back and said these are from the same album, like how would you I would question how you got there. How I like both of those songs, but I would question like how you would put those on the same record. And the answer is you put 3.5 hours in between it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll definitely interrogate this, but I do like this comment from listener Joe, who compares Elseq to an avant-garde art gallery with 5 different wings. There are no descriptions for any of the works and no instructions on how you're even supposed to experience them aside from numbering the wings 1 through 5. You have the sense that each one has some kind of theme that the artist intended, but just can't quite put your finger on what it might be. The place is a bit overwhelming. Some of it is mind-blowing and some of it just doesn't connect with you. Overall, though, you're glad you visited, and the work there gives you a lot to think about. I mean, I mentioned how a lot of the songs feel nonlinear, and it feels like you're just supposed to sort of wander around inside of them. But do you think of the album that way? Like maybe the different parts are different wings in a museum and you're just supposed to like wander around at will?
I like the description the listener gave, but I feel like you don't number them if you're not supposed to go in order. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know, because now I'm thinking, and not to get ahead, but I am thinking like NTS, it's 1 through 4, and they're numbered, and I don't feel the same, because they are specifically to fit in, a time block, for a radio show. So maybe, I'm trying to avoid like being a hypocrite with my own, answers, but I just feel like this wasn't made to fit on a radio show. Like the 1, 2, 3, 4 of NTS is, I think, episode 1, 2, 3, 4, where Elseq isn't that, and I don't think you number them if there's not an intention to go in order. You could call them something. You could give each one a different name, or you wouldn't split it, or I don't know, because I really do like that description from the listener, and I really do kind of agree with it. I feel like if I went to a museum and the wings were numbered 1 through 5, maybe this is just me. I'm a rule follower, but I would go into 1 first, right? And I would end on 5, and because I would imagine that they wouldn't number them if I was supposed to go out.
That's a good point.
Like a lot of museums, will, either it's in some sort of chronological order or thematic order or, whatever. I do always feel like when you go in a museum, there's usually like a path you're supposed to take, you don't
have to, but
you don't have to, but
what they designed it
especially
for.
If you're, if you're not familiar with the works of that museum or something, like it'll help you a lot if you go the way that they're wanting you to go. And so, I think that works. Like if you're comfortable in Elseq, maybe put on 4 and then 2 or something. But I think there's some sort of guide in giving you those numbers.
Yeah, I agree. But it's also just like as evidence of like it being one huge piece or something like that. It's just like it's not always the case, but sometimes it's totally weird. I think how like these discs end. This is obviously something we'll talk about, but it's like. Curve-Katin or whatever, the last track on Elseq 1. Like, that's not like any kind of grand closer. I don't think it like sums up Elseq 1, or like 7 Slip is like the weirdest ending for Elseq 4 or whatever. And like stuff like Pendulou Casual from Elseq 5, like it's a weird ass opener. It almost feels like it's not supposed to be an opener. It's actually supposed to transition us from 4 to 5 or something. So, I just found myself thinking a lot about like just sort of deciding that this is like, it's ideal. I know not everybody can, but it's almost ideal if you could like put aside the time and the effort to like go all the way through it. Maybe take a break or whatever, but like it's one hell of a journey. On that note, though, let's start zooming in on Elseq 1. If Elseq 1 was its own album, which I don't think it is, but if it was, how would you describe it? What is its identity?
I think Elseq 1, I think, is the one that has a bit of an easier identity to describe than the other ones. This one's much more like abrasive, and we haven't got like crazy out there with the links yet. I mean, the first 2 tracks they're the 11, 12, there's 2 12 minutes, 1 11 minute.
Yeah.
But there's none of these, 22, 30 minute kind of tracks where we're almost in normal like Autechre territory. But this is the like more abrasive, more noisy one of the set, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that because of the way it starts, and it like sets such a strong tone, especially because it is 2 like really long tracks up front. But I came to decide that like Elseq 1 is almost like the sampler for what you're about to get into. Like it kind of gives you a little taste of everything in a weird way, because like it gives you some of the harshest noise here with like Feed 1 and C16 Deep Tread. C16 Deep Tread is maybe not so noisy, but it's like loud metallic clanking. It's very like rhythmic, like almost devoid of melody, and just sort of like this wild kind of groove. It gets into like some of the weirdest, most abstract territory on 13 times 0 step. It gets into some of the luscious, like prettiest territory with Pendulou HV Moda. And then it gets like almost totally weird electro like bop with the last track Curve Katin. It's almost like I have a hard time identifying like what its character is, because it feels like a little sampler plate, you know?
Yeah, I can see that. It does sort of. Maybe this is the lobby of the museum. You know, you put a couple pieces in there. You know, to get before people bought their tickets. Get them in. I mean, they played Feed 1 on the radio. That was the little
right.
the little sampler dish. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, so listener Tyler writes, Elseq 1 sounds the most obviously like AE Live. Do you think this one was recorded earlier than the other 4? It's an interesting thought. I mean, C16 Deep Tread is obviously like a big part of the AE Live sets, and it's interesting because I wouldn't have thought that, you know, like how C16 ends, like how there's like just that like clong, you know, like ringing out, and I wouldn't have thought that was still part of C16 Deep Tread when I was listening to the AE Live sets and like kind of reading like, oh, around here is where C16 happens. But, you know, I mean, it is like a big 12-minute sort of chunk, but Feed 1 also, you know, I'm not sure that appears on AE Live like directly, but it does have that like just pummeling low end, like abrasive power electronic destruction quality to it. I mean, do you hear this is like the most AE Live like, you know, Elseq?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say that, you know, obviously because part of it is part of AE Live, you know, with C16. But yeah, I agree with that. It is the one that has like the most, you know, pummeling, noisy sort of thing that AE Live, you know, I had. But
then again, I'm like totally torn because it only feels that way because of, I think, the first 2 tracks. Like the last 3 tracks are not really AE Live-ish at all.
That's true, but I just feel like, you know, none of the other, you know, he said the one that's most like AE Live. I feel like the other 4, you know, records don't have anything like that. You know what I mean? Like
that's true. I mean, Elseq 2 has C7B2, which we'll talk about, which is apparently part of some of the AE Live sets, like the really, really noisy parts. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it does sort of feel like the most rooted, and it kind of is fitting because it feels like I said, AE Live was the starting point for the sounds that we got here. And so it makes sense to sort of start like deep in AE Live territory. Now, I want to start breaking it apart by asking you what your favorite tracks are. But first, I want to quiz you on the Rate Your Music individual track ratings. 3 tracks are bolded here. Let's see if you can get 2 of them.
All right. Feed 1.
Yep.
And C16.
Yeah, you're right. And the other one is Pendulo HV Moda. So nice. Are those your favorites? What are your favorites here?
I mean, I think Feed 1 is the obvious, you know, highlight here. That's it's such a cool track. It's such a like good opener to this record. You know, I feel like it really catches your attention, especially if you're gonna be in here, you know, for the whole 4-hour journey. If you're thinking of it as one big chunk, you know, it just that you need something out of the gate to like really hook you. And I think Feed 1 does that so well. And it's just, I mean, some of the noises they make here are just so cool, you know, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I love this track as well. I mean, I think what's cool about it is that it is like just sort of like it feels like you're in a thunderstorm or something. Like it's just like your head is literally in a thundercloud and it's just like pummeling you with like this rolling, like tumbling low end or something. But at the same time, there's like a lot going on. It's like kind of exactly what I was saying about like what you can dig out of noise, because if you listen like real deep into it, you know, you'll notice like these kind of they're like these little licks sort of done by like the high end. It almost sounds something like a piano, like sort of like heavily digitized or something, and like kind of being like pitch stretched and time stretched and stuff. But you know what I mean? It's like this like pummeling and then like these kind of interesting little like tangled webs of that kind of like low metallic sound, you know, but it's like melodic almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I just love it because it's not just noise. It's like more than just noise. And we got a lot of praise for Feed 1. Listener Joe calls it possibly the coolest opener they've ever done. I love how instead of leading us into the project easy as they've done other times, they just blast us with some of the most brutal yet always very musical and engaging noise they've ever done. Like they want us to go, so this is how it's going to be. And listener Steve writes, Dan could probably empathize, but I just had some rare time at home alone. I listened to Feed 1 loudly and I love it. Like you guys mentioned on the AE Live podcast, some of this stuff needs to be played loudly and it's more physical than oral. Oral. He adds, what I love about electro isn't really the composition of that music, but the sound. I can't get enough of it. I felt the same way about dubstep when it was new. I just love the deep bass sound, not the hokey wubs or predictable drops. And Feed 1 has its own unique sound, especially about halfway through after 5:20 or so. It has this wonderful abrasive pummeling electro synth. I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's masterful for all those reasons. That it is like abrasive noise, but there's so much to explore inside of it. Do you think this has kind of a forward momentum, or is it more of a like non-linear track, like I was asking about earlier?
This one feels like it's got some momentum, especially compared to a lot of other things on Elseq. It's still 11 and a half minutes, and so it gets like, it's not the most momentum ever, but I think this one definitely, moves forward a bit more than other ones.
Yeah, Joe also highlights C16 Deep Tread and Pendulou HV Moda, which he says sounds like a next generation, more advanced version of Blade Aloras with less noise and a more high-res sound design. Listener Jordan says Pendulou has so much emotion in it, certainly more emotion than anything from Amber or Incunabula. I did want to highlight Pendulou as probably my favorite track here. I mean, I love Feed 1 probably next, but Pendulou is just like breathtaking. I mean, it's like this, it's almost like got this joyous and like kind of euphoric quality to it. I mean, just like this absolute lush sort of sound to it, and this weird just kind of like rolling grind. But it's like, if Feed 1 is like grinding noise, this is like somehow like kind of a clean, like pretty grind. I mean, it just feels like something like, I don't know, watching a sunset from like a distant planet or something. I mean, it's like interesting how you end up there, like in such pretty territory,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It is like that, sort of pretty, but still like, kind of industrial sound, not industrial music, but like almost like a machinery or something, or like you said, some odd planet or something. Yeah, it is odd, so close to Feed 1, we've gotten from such harshness to such like, beauty.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I wanted to note about like C16 Deep Tread is that it's a lot of that metallic clanging. It's like very much in kind of what I would call like an industrial sound palette, but it's got the most like it's got a very like nice groove, like kind of a hip hop swagger to it. I mean, it's I don't know, would you call like this release, maybe Elseq in general, fun?
Elseq in general, I don't think of it as like a fun record. This is like a headphones kind of hanging out kind of record. Nothing here like makes me want to dance or anything. I guess Elseq 1 is maybe the more fun of the 5, maybe. But I don't think fun would be a descriptor I would use. Yeah,
it's just interesting how it's like it sometimes does groove like real nicely, and Feed 1 has kind of like, I don't know, punk show energy and stuff. I mean, I feel like maybe of all the releases, well, maybe that's not true. Elseq 4 is pretty fun, but I mean, this one has like a lot of energy, but also a lot of, I don't know, interesting nooks and crannies in that kind of sampler plate way. Is there anything you don't like? And maybe I could get you to guess one of the 2 unbolded tracks here.
I'll say Curve Captain, maybe unbolded.
That is unbolded. What do you think of that one? Or is that one you don't like?
No, I there's nothing I dislike on this record. I dig it all. I guess that one because it's the shorter one, here only being 7 minutes. And it's a little more down tempo ish, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's got like a nice little bop. It's just weird how it's got kind of like a fizzly, like kind of shuffling quality to it. And it sort of goes into like pure electro territory, which I feel like it's such a weird little like shift to make at the end of this like particular Elseq. I mean, again, just like adds to that because it's got like weird like spaceship bleeps and like more like sounds that like I would associate with like the genre of electro rather than like the like cosmic entities of deep space time,
Yeah, on Elseq 1, that song is the one that almost, makes me think like, is this just, a random assortment, to equal a link, because it is the one that doesn't fit quite as well. But on its own, I mean, I like it. I think maybe even its place, if we're looking at this as a singular record, and I think we sort of already touched on it, that most of them don't have like closers that obviously make them albums or something. It doesn't feel like the best closer. Like if this was just one record, I think Pendulou would have been a better like I would switch those 2 tracks around. So yeah, I mean it's the one that I can nitpick at, I think.
Yeah, it's not like a great closer and does kind of make me feel like we're not closing anything at all. Like we're really just moving right on. In fact, as sort of like a look ahead, I mean, I think Curve Kitten has like some weird like office environment energy to it, like fax machine sounding. And then I feel like the first track of Elseq 2, Elk6 Onset, also has that kind of like fax machine, like modem dialing thing to it. I almost started to like wonder if it is just meant to like kind of lead us right on into Elseq 2. But I will say that as far as Elseq 1 goes, 13 times 0 Step is probably my least favorite track here. This one feels like experiments just set to tape. Like this feels like Piero Scruffy's kind of complaint, where it's like struggling to ever come together. I mean, it's like sort of like fascinating, but it's, I don't know, it just like keeps like sort of falling apart. It's like almost feels like, I mean, it's interesting, but it feels, you know what I mean? It feels like less developed than the other ones.
Yeah, it is the one that's it's a little more forgettable, I think, than the rest of the tracks as well. And yeah, you're right. I feel like it never like 100% finds its stride or anything, because you're right, it does like sort of just feel like trying to patch out and you know, maybe not. It's maybe the kind of thing, you know, if you were making just a regular length album, you'd you know, leave on the cutting room floor. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, so I mean, summing up our thoughts on Elseq 1, I mean, it sounds like we're both in the same camp, that it's like something like a mixed bag. I mean, it's weird because it's got like 3 tracks that I consider some of the best on the whole project, which is Feed 1, C16 Deep Tread, and Pendulou HV Moda, are just such standouts. I think Feed 1 is like a perfect opener somehow for this entire 4-hour experience. Like it really brings you in. And I mean, that is like no small feat. But then there's like these other 2 tracks that just feel like, I don't know, just kind of, I don't want to fault it, because it's like, that's sort of part of the idea of this whole thing, is if it is a 4-hour thing, there's going to be lots of like weird little nooks and crannies and like weird left turns that you follow and then just have to kind of return back from. But as a thing, you know, it feels like a little less successful maybe than the others.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty in looking at these as, you know, 5 different records, because you're completely right. You know, I mean, Feed 1 is like such a feat as like such a great opener for this giant, you know, 4-hour thing. But then, yeah, when you look at just this as 52 minutes, I mean, what is it, like 16 or 15, 16 minutes of it, like I don't think are the best of the series or anything, or even just in this 52 minutes, you know, there's sort of like missteps. And, you know, in a 52 minute record, if you got 16 minutes that aren't the best, like, you know, that's sort of knocking it down. But then again, you're right. If you're gonna have a 4-hour album, you sort of, it's that old, you know, White Album thing we always kind of talk about. You want the not the, you know, you want the wild honey pies and stuff in there. It adds to the length and the breadth of it, and then the, you know, those nooks and crannies to discover. You know, if everything's just like immediately, you know, great, like Feed 1 or something, it doesn't have like the deep dive, you know, like sort of thing you want to do in it. So I really do think that that's making me lean more towards this. Definitely is you know, a 5-disc thing that you should listen to all at once.
Yeah, I agree 100%, because it's just like, it doesn't make any really sense as an album if these 5 tracks were like the, you know, what number are we on now? 12th Autechre album. It's like it would be pretty unsuccessful, I think. So it's like, but it has that kind of like mixed bag kind of quality that works on a 4-hour piece. So yeah, I really hesitate to even like judge Elseq 1 as its own thing. But goddamn, I can't say enough about Pendulou HV Moda. I just wanted to mention also that like, I love how it sort of like resets. It like goes in almost like a breakdown quality, and then like re-enters with like kind of darker shades to it. It's part of like that sunset quality, I think. I mean, I think that's an absolute masterpiece. But let's move on to Elseq 2. How would you describe Elseq 2 on its own? Does it have a strikingly different character from Elseq 1?
I think it's got a little bit of a different character, and this is the one that, you know, we're starting with a 27-minute track. We're ending with a 13-minute track. You know, this is the more sort of this is maybe the one that I think has the most like defining characteristic. You know, this is almost like the ambient record or something. You know, like ELYC6 onset like sort of has this like disintegration thing. It's one that like, while very slow momentum, it's the track that I think like maybe most in all 5 Elseq like has a point A to point B. I saw somebody in the like what's that thing called, like the shout box or what, comment box on Rate Your Music. They said like, does it mean early onset? And it's like, dimension, like you remember that Caretaker record, from a couple of years ago, sort of that same thing. And I don't know that I can find the word early in ELYC6, but I think it does, like, even if, they don't intend it to mean that, I think like what that person in the comment box said, like, it does sort of like work, it does like sort of have this like disintegration kind of feeling to it. It just slowly like trickles out. And I don't feel like much else in the entirety of Elseq like does that. It's sort of like these snapshots of jams or bigger picture things, and I feel like that track is like maybe we're actually getting the whole thing, and maybe that's why it is 27 minutes. I understand too why this is the lowest rated of them. I think it's the like least easy listening of them because of that. I mean,
I think it's like the most like electroacoustic embedded
exactly
of the things here. I mean, it's like
exactly
the most experimental of the Elseqs. It's probably, I mean, it's not like it's the noisiest, although it's like pretty low key actually. We'll talk about it, but like C7B2 is kind of thought of as this like abrasive, like Gantz graph type thing. And I think people think that because of how abrasive and harsh the noises are, but if you like kind of listen to the beat, it's like pretty chill. It's like as chill as Elseq onset, which also has a very chill beat. And so it's like interesting, like sort of noise experiments and explorations inside of like pretty mellow, like verging on ambient energy sort of. And then for some fucking reason there's Kimmer 151.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we're going to do with that, but yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, again, Keimer 151 is again another one of those tracks that like makes you think like, are they just jamming some things together? Because I think like the first track and the last track like really do sort of fit on the same record together. Because you're right, even C7B2 like it's noisy, not in like the intense like way, just like in the electroacoustic way, like using like literal noise to make like music. And it is like kind of chill, like I think the first track is, but yeah, Keimer 151 is this like kind of strange, I don't even know how to like describe it. It's like this like twisting sort of feel to it to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how it almost like pulls off what I think Oversteps failed to do, which is like to make the beat track the interlude, like feel like the interlude in between two like kind of amorphous, like swelling kind of ambient droney type things. So in that sense, it's like kind of interesting how it works that way. But yeah, I mean, it's weird because again, it's sort of like a mixed bag, but it does feel like this one has a little bit more of an identity, and that might just be because it has only 3 tracks and 2 are like huge, sort of noisy electroacoustic, and a lot of that physical modeling stuff really shining through here. Like these are really metallic clanging type of real physical object type sounds. But as you mentioned, Elseq 2 is widely considered the worst of the bunch. Listener Joe writes, the hottest take you'll probably ever get from me is that if Elseq 2 were its own separate release, it would be by far my least favorite by them, and is so annoying to me that it drives the rest of Elseq down in my personal rankings. Chorus tracks like BNC Castle and FWZE were great for 3 minutes or so, but did anyone listen to those and think, oh man, if only this went on for 20 more minutes? Elseq onset sounds like a mound of AOL free trial CDs that were buried above a radioactive landfill, becoming self-aware and getting their revenge on humanity by attacking us with bad dial-up. C7B2 sounds like something the FBI would have used to get the Branch Davidians to come out or to get information out of Guantanamo inmates. I'm all for abrasive music, but the stuff on Elseq 2 just sounds grating for the sake of being grating. There's probably not enough tracks to go through favorites and least favorites here, but it's worth noting that this is the only Elseq with nothing bolded on Rate Your Music. However, listener Colin says C7B2 may in fact be my all-time favorite Autechre track. It's like catching a ride on a giant metallic wave from start to finish. There's so many different movements. I especially love when the song sounds like it's collapsed entirely around 8 minutes and then rebuilds itself even stronger than it was before. Listener Jordan says, I love C7B2. That track is king shit. It's like Ganscraft having a stroke or a system crash. It's like a machine similar to a joint from Tri Repete would sound, but with edgier cutting glitch sounds, and it's all beautifully closed off with that bubbling ending that just sounds like sludge. Listener Steve compares LX6 Onset to a bad Merzbow track and says C7B2 is noisy too, but it's much more interesting. Listener Alex writes, I will side with the consensus that LX Onset is really tough to get through. It occupies the same role on Elseq that Ecol 4 does on Plus for me. Confounding, not very enjoyable at all, way too long, and a momentum killer. Just wanted to dump all that out here all at once so we can kind of tackle these like divisive and super long tracks. I mean, we've already sort of started to, but do you like these two long tracks here?
I actually do. I like C7B2 the most. I enjoy electroacoustic music, and I think like that track is Autechre, like, paying homage to that kind of stuff, and I enjoy it. I like ELYC6 Onset. When you're listening to the whole thing, getting through 4 hours, I think it works better than when listening to it on just an hour. Like if you chop this down to 45 minutes, more than half of it being that, I can see like the complaint. But I think like in this giant context, it's almost like even though it's maybe early for it, it's a bit of a breather, like you can kind of just enjoy like the disintegration of it. And, it's not a track that like commands, your like, undivided attention. It's a great like sort of background thing, which, there's a time and a place for, backgroundy kind of music. And I think they do it well here. Keimer, I'd maybe stick it somewhere else. I don't think it's a bad track. I just think it's maybe a bad location for the track.
It's impossible to like remember it or anything.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Of how swallowed it gets by these two tracks. But I'll say I love LX6 Onset. Like I really, really do. And I do like, electroacoustic type stuff, and that all that kind of, stuff is appealing to me. But I also feel like this is kind of highly listenable. Like it's fascinating to me, first off, because of how dry it is. Like it's very quiet and like small sounding, which is interesting because stuff like Feed 1 and like Pendulou, I mentioned feeling like you were on this cosmic scale, and now all of a sudden everything feels like very small and just like tinny, and there's just like no low end or anything. And I love how it's got this almost like cheap, shitty like hi-hat running over the whole thing. Like the beat sounds so inappropriate or something because underneath it is like a very organic kind of like bubbling and gurgling sound, like something almost cute about it. And then add to that these kind of weird atonal strings just like hanging over this track that like in like almost like a Penderecki kind of way. Like there's a lot of tension. I mean, I just feel like this is such an incredible combination of sounds. And it's true that about halfway through it becomes like much harder because the beat sort of slowly fades away and it becomes almost like pure electroacoustic experimentation. But that's part of the journey, like you were saying. It's like the interesting sort of disintegration of this little piece. But for the most part, I feel like you can kind of tap your foot and feel the pulse throughout the whole thing. C7B2, I'm a little less into. I mean, like I said, I think it's just overstated how aggressive this track is. It's kind of like a chill little like groove, like a little hip hop kind of groove, pretty mellow. And it's kind of like chopping noise in a hip hop way. It's kind of like just different noise blasts, like kind of reassembled in different patterns. And I don't know, it gets a little heavier at the end, but I just feel like it's almost like 13 minutes of just how many different ways can we chop blasts of noise.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting. And yeah, I don't find it like overly abrasive or anything. But maybe it's just being used to that kind of thing or something.
Yeah, listener Colin shared this interesting comment. He says, certain tracks on Elseq take advantage of the Blade Aloris song structure, if that makes sense. I think Blade Aloris was a bit of a precursor to tracks like C16 Deep Tread, which also has that percussive stab throughout the entire track. That 4/4 stab basically gives you something to hold on to while the track morphs and transforms around it. That holds true for a lot of Elseq, I'd say. Pendulou HV Moda has more of a punchy car door slam throughout. C7B2 actually has a traditional techno boom bap buried underneath the metal waves of sound on top of it, etc. I mean, we're getting into some of the longest, tracks here, or at least one of the longest tracks here. Do you think that holds true? That they always kind of give you something to hold on to?
Yeah, I think Autechre is like great about that, just in general. But yeah, I think there's always like sort of, something to grasp onto.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting how it's like XI worked that way a lot of the time, where it was like very steady beat, and you're supposed to listen to all the shit that's going on, all the textures evolving and stuff. This kind of like goes even further with that, and that the beat is often so sparse and so minimal, and it's like all about the textures, but it's still like this nice little anchor to have. Like I said, you can tap your foot through LX6 onset, like 2/3 of it, you can tap your foot through it. And yeah, it just kind of gives you like this nice anchor. I do feel like they kind of developed that from the XI quality. So how would you sum up your feelings on Elseq 2? Does it deserve to be considered one of the worst or the worst?
I don't think so. I like it. I'm trying to think it is like maybe one of the ones I would rank lower. It's not my favorite, but I don't know that it's the worst. And even if it is the least good of these, I don't think that's necessarily like negative. But basically, I don't agree with the 328 on Rate Your Music. I think it's much better than that. I get why it has that though. This is definitely like not the easy listening disc here. But I think it's one of the more interesting experiments that we've gotten from Autechre and everything. I think this is the perfect place for doing something like this. Where else but within a 4-hour album can you take like the risk of Elseq on set, doing that for 27 minutes. I think it works. I don't think it deserves a bad reputation or anything.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the LX6 onset is like such a monster that it has a hard time like having an identity as a album on its own, and it's like, I think C7 is interesting. It's not like a highlight for me, but it's certainly like fascinating to listen to. Keimer, a little less so, but it's so short, it's like over in just a second anyway. But it's just like there isn't quite enough time on this record for it to become any identity other than like LX6 onset and some other stuff, in my opinion, which is why I would also kind of rank it low. But goddamn, do I love LX6 onset. All right, on to Elseq 3. How would you describe the sound of this one on its own? Does this one have a clear identity? You're going to be repeating the same questions over and over.
Yeah, I know. This one, I think it doesn't. They sort of like repeat the same pattern as Elseq 2. We've got another three track record right after this one, almost the same sort of track lengths, starting with a 22 minute here, ending with a 24. I think this one starts kind of in the ambient territory with Easter, TBM2, very laid back, kind of chill. I think TBM2 sort of does what Keimer failed to do. I kind of agree. It's a little bit better in that role. It's sort of like it's 6 minutes and 44 seconds. It's sandwiched between these two, massive 20+ minute tracks. It's gonna get kind of that interlude feel to it. I think that's inescapable. But I think like it does a good job of it. I remember TBM2 much more than Keimer. I have to sort of like make an effort to remember which track that is. Whereas like TBM2, I think it's just like a real nice, like laid back, like chill kind of song. Like
it's like a steady stomp that feels like it was playing before we came in and continues playing after we came out, which is kind of like a perfect little interlude thing. Yeah,
exactly. It feels like if this is that hall, the museum thing that the listener was talking about, it's almost like we're in the hallway, like
yeah.
You don't necessarily enter the hallway at the same spot or leave it at the same spot. Everyone sort of can experience it a different way, and this sort of feels like that. It's we need a hallway in between these two giant tracks, and this just it just does what Keimer couldn't do, I think. And then of course, Mesh Cinerreal is so crazy. It's such like a out there track. We've getting back into like real noisy kind of stuff, just spread out for 24 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, Mesh Cinerreal is like a highlight of the whole album for me. It's got like kind of this weird, like, again, sort of like a lumbering, like, chillness to it, and yet the sounds are like totally grinding and abrasive. But I mean, what happens is like those grinding sounds, they keep getting kind of pitch shifted in something like approaching a kind of nebulous melody. Like I feel like it's actually very listenable and accessible. And then there's something about the groove of this track that is like, it's just like almost a more successful C7 from Elseq 2, where it's like, I don't know, it's just this transfixing, like almost like a voodoo groove quality, and it's got like a drum circle kind of energy to it, where there's like lots of little delays and stuff that make like interesting little rhythms just for one moment, or like interesting little echoes and trail offs to the like grinding shredded sound here. That is like an endlessly fascinating thing. Like does not wear out its time at all over the course of 24 minutes. Easter might be a little bit different, because that one's a pretty like stationary thing. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's like fascinating because it's like an ambient, like kind of pretty, like beautiful 2 chords back and forth kind of piece, but there's like no reverb or anything, like nothing lush about it. It's like all kind of metallic clanging, but it's somehow turned into something like very gorgeous. I mean, it's a feat, but does it bother you that it's so stationary for so long?
No, I like it. I like very stationary, drone music and stuff. And I think like this is sort of Autechre almost doing drone, which I enjoy. In fact, like I wouldn't mind it if it went on a little longer. I really like the track. Maybe it's sort of in the middle of the total package here.
Yeah,
it's maybe not the. If we're looking at it as a, one record, it's maybe not the best spot for it, but also maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, like, sort of startup, but it's, I don't know, it's just so arresting. It's like absolutely fascinating to me. And kind of the best example of what I was talking about earlier about the like non-linear listening. It just feels like this huge blown out painting or something that you just are supposed to like look around at, or like a big room that you're just supposed to walk around in. Once again, this is such a short installment that I'll just like kind of dump all of the listener reactions on top of you at once. Listener Joe calls Elseq 3 an obvious highlight and writes, I more or less agree to name my daughter Easter, or Istere, if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm sorry about that. But because of how much he loves the song Easter, I don't think there's a single track that makes 22 minutes fly by quicker. It's completely monolithically unique in their discography as this bubbling, boiling drone that repeats endlessly, but in slightly different ways each time. They're completely transfixing. The beat in TBM2 is totally and completely dope. And then Mesh Cinerreal comes in as what sounds like a mind-blowing synthesis of the two into something even more epic than either of the first. The transition away from the first section, where the first part melts away into the TMB2 beat, and then all of a sudden when you think the song is over, it explodes into the second section, is one of the coolest moments in their entire career. The melody, chord progression, whatever in that second part is one of the most emotional things in the entire 5-part release. Listener Jordan says, I'm going to say that I love TBM2 because somebody has to. Even if you're using it as an interlude, it's still pretty nice. It's a safe and approachable track. He also notes that Mesh Cinerreal is so great he doesn't even have to say anything more than that. So I guess we've sort of hashed it out, but is there anything you don't like about this release? Sounds like you're kind of on board with the whole thing.
Yeah, in fact, thinking about it, broken down like this, you asked me if Elseq 2 like deserves its kind of negative reputation, and I said no, and I still believe that, but Elseq 3 does sort of feel like Elseq 2 done better. You know,
a little bit.
It's the same like sort of formula, 3 tracks, this one sort of interlude. I feel like if I didn't like ELYC6 Onset like so much, that I think I would like agree that Elseq 2 is bad or something. And so it really does like kind of feel like 3 is 2 done better, especially them being like back to back. You know, if they were separated, then maybe I wouldn't draw such a comparison between the two. But it just really, it does feel like that.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Listener Steve writes, speaking of what I was saying earlier, I like Easter in the mood it sets. However, the song is much too long. All of the ideas could have been presented in a 5 to 8 minute track, and it would have felt the same. You said that Sean mentioned he likes to play a sequence or script while doing work around the house. Easter feels that way, like it's a somewhat varying sequence that repeats for 22 minutes without evolving. I mean, I have no doubt that that's how Easter came about and how a lot of these songs came about, that they were just sort of like, they have like a set it and forget it kind of quality. Yeah. And again, it's like sort of these conditionals and stuff interacting and creating strange accidents and stuff, even though, again, it's like carefully composed and conducted because they set up all the conditionals and everything there. But, you know, I think Easter is just like, I sort of agree, but you kind of get like, you enter a trance, I think, when you're listening to it because of how unchanging it is. And I think that's sort of to its credit. But I feel like if you want to pop into Easter for 8 minutes, like this album allows that, like that would be okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, because I think like it is the sort of thing that can just be played like forever, you know, on a, you know, on a loop or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, if you only want to listen to it for 8 minutes or whatever, but I don't know, things like that, like drone music and stuff, like it sort of needs the giantness, the monolithicness of it, like, is part of the deal. You know, I don't think like Phil Nyblock or something has the same like effect if they're 5 minutes. You know, if 5 minutes of one tone doesn't have the same effect as 45 minutes, it's just
right.
I know that sounds like maybe pretentious or stupid or something, but it's just like it's part of, you don't get to that like, you know, trance sort of feel like in 5 minutes. It's the sense of like when you hear like something like so unchanging for so long, it makes your mind sort of like almost like hallucinate and like find changes, you know, that like may or may not, you know, specifically be there. But I just think like the length of it is so important. It's just like, I mean, Elseq in general, you know, like it being so long, I think like it having these big pieces like helps it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also agree with like listener Joe, where it's like Mesh Cinereal, the impact is part of like how long of a journey you've been on already, and the way it kind of like synthesizes that like physical modeling, like sort of clangy shit from Easter. You know, it hits harder if you spend a long time in it. So I guess we kind of summed up how much we like Elseq 3. Before moving on, though, I just want to note for anybody who's not aware, what's the deal with the Spotify version, Dan?
Yeah, it very much seems like they just made a mistake uploading it. It cuts out like 45 minutes early, or 45 seconds. yeah, 45 minutes. 45 seconds early. It just, like when you're listening on Spotify, it just ends. It just like literally cuts off. And there should be, like when you buy it from the AE store, the track is longer. I tried bitching at Warp on Twitter, but it didn't seem to help. So, you know, if anyone wants to sign my a petition, I guess, I don't know. It just like literally sounds like someone made a mistake, because you used Tidal, and you said it's correct there.
Yeah, it's correct. And, you know, and I'll say, you know, it's not like you're missing like anything like absolutely mind-blowing in the last 45 seconds of Mesh Cinereal, but it kind of like peters apart, and like, you know, everything's sort of like, I don't know, it comes to like sort of a nice conclusion in the way it just sort of shatters and falls away. But
yeah, it's an abrupt like cutoff on Spotify. Like it like literally just stops, and it's just such a shame. I don't know. It just like it just very much seems like a mistake.
Yeah. So just a heads up if you're listening on Spotify. All right, moving right along to Elseq 4. Again, this is going to be a record-long episode, I think. How would you describe Elseq 4?
I think 4 is the most fun one. You know, especially coming off of, you know, we've had these 2 discs of like these giant, you know, monolithic tracks. Here, this is almost the like this is a normal Autechre record. I think this is the one disc that if we got rid of everything else and we just released this one, I think people would have the least problem with it. Was this the highest rated one on Rate Your Music?
Yeah, so this is the highest rated by far. It's the only bolded Elseq on Rate Your Music, in fact, at a 3.67, which is like quite a bit above. I think Elseq 1 is next at 3.5.
Yeah, see, and that doesn't surprise me at all. This is the one that's just like the most, normal. We've got 5 tracks, which I mean, is short. We still have some long things. Latent Calls, 14 and a half minutes. But this one is the most like just out and out fun.
Yeah, it's like the highest BPMs by far.
Definitely.
On the whole Elseq. We've been like pretty mellow. I mean, it's wild that you start off in like feed 1 and C16 deep tread territory, and then you've spent like a long time in like very mellow territory, despite how noisy it can be. And then ACDWN2, Acid Dwin 2, maybe it's an acid reference, kind of has that acid energy, but it just kicks off like in this slamming like electro beat. I mean, it's like a pure electro banger, and it gets a little weird in the end with this kind of like held groan pattern, like this kind of like long start stop thing, but it still is like keeping up the energy moving. Latent Call again brings back like this really just, I don't know, like high energy, like a lot of urgency in Latent Call for sure. And you mentioned that kind of like, bell type sound. I think of it as like an alarm that just starts going like gawk, 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 gawk. And it just kind of like picks up the urgency of this thing. And it just has like such a relentless chug. It again does that kind of like stop start thing and gets like quite spacey and ambient, but then it always like comes like just click clacking back in. I mean, it's fantastic. I think Artov is, again, it's got that kind of like consistent, like it's almost got like what I would call like reggae chord stabs or something. And then Seven Slip is like fucking weird. I'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, and I should mention the Fold Free Casual, it's very, very spacey and just like these huge shimmering, like reverby chords and stuff. But then you get this like kind of pummeling like energy to it. I mean, it's remarkable almost how consistent this one is compared to some of the others.
Yeah, this one is like very consistent. This is the one that like definitely makes me feel like they're not just randomly jammed together or anything.
Right,
this one like feels composed much more. Yeah, I mean this is like down and out the most fun that you're gonna have during Elseq, I think. Yeah,
well, I want to ask what your favorite tracks are here, but I'll quiz you about Rate Your Music because we have a few tracks to actually work with again. 4 out of 5 are bolded. What do you think is the highest?
Latent Call.
Yeah, you're right. Latent Call.
Good.
What do you think is the only one that's not bolded?
Maybe Seventh Slip.
Nope, it is Artov. Should have gone with the shortest one, which always seems to be the case here. But what are your favorite tracks here? Favorite moments?
I mean, I like Latent Call. It's just like you said, it has that like urgency to it with that like beeping alarm clock kind of thing. It's just so noisy and like abrasive and stuff. I like Fold Free Casual, even though it's a little more casual than the other ones, laid back or whatever. There's nothing I dislike here. I agree with you. Seventh Slip is weird, but I'll save it. We can get to it. Yeah.
I mean, it's similar to Elseq 1 in the sense that it's like a weird way to end this kind of like electro banger segment of the album. But yeah, I mean, I'll say that like Latent Call is probably my favorite. I mean, it's just so much fun. It's like so much energy. It's such a monster of a track. Listener Joe calls ACDWN2 a highlight of the whole album and says, Fold Free Casual I've never been able to make my mind up about. Sometimes I feel like it's a standout of the album, and other times it feels like a meandering 9+ minutes that goes nowhere. I like the concept of the frantic percussion breakdown on top of the gorgeous strings, but I think my reaction to it depends on my general mood on a given day. Yeah, I mean, I like Fold Free Casual. I'll just sort of say that like whenever I'm preparing for these episodes and I'm listening, I always put like a little star next to the tracks that I want to sort of talk about as a highlight of mine. And this is the only Elseq that I didn't star anything. I feel like it's almost like consistently solid, but like without the huge standouts for me. You don't feel that way?
No, I can see that. I think like this one is like Yeah, like as a whole, yeah, I think it stands out. But you're right. Like breaking it down, I'm looking at like the scores I personally gave each one, and it's not the highest. It's also not the lowest. But you're right. Yeah, like individual track kind of wise, it does sort of have the least standout.
Yeah, I mean, and I do want to sort of single out maybe like the most interesting, not my favorite, but like the most interesting track here is Seventh Slip, which is like this really bizarre, like kind of skipping record thing. I mean, I jotted down, and it's funny because I wrote down like, this sounds like somebody who doesn't know how to use a turntable, like trying to scratch. And then there's like other tracks where I wrote like, like we're basically in the territory of like at the end of Elseq onset, it's like it gets into the territory where it's like, this sounds like someone who doesn't know how to use Max MSP is using it, like free jazz quality, where like it's so good that it sounds like they don't know how to play. But Seventh Slip just sounds like the weirdest like turntable gone wrong, and like this strange kind of like almost rock-esque bass thump, like a doom 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 kind of thing to it. And I don't know. What do you think about this track?
I like your turntable analogy. It like sort of sounds like things are reversed, like but not fully. I don't know. It is like such a strange. It's very interesting in the sense that it is so odd.
Yeah,
it definitely sounds like an experiment,
yes, an experiment, and not a great closer to Elseq 4. But again, I just don't think that Elseq 4 like matters in any real way, other than like Autechre just giving you permission to like take a break now and then or something, because it's just like it doesn't wrap up this kind of like high energy, high octane like electro segment of the record, give or take. But it's just like a weird one-off, like strange left turn, the kind of thing you would expect to be buried deep within a 4-hour album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's the kind of thing that like really makes you feel like this is supposed to be one big thing. Again, it's that White Album thing. You gotta kind of jam those sort of weird experiments in there to justify giving you so much stuff.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything you really dislike here? I don't know if you mentioned disliking anything.
No, nothing I like dislike. I mean, I guess Seventh Slip would maybe be my like least favorite, but I do think it's very interesting. It's just maybe if I was making a playlist or something, I probably wouldn't throw it in there.
Yeah, it's like 13 times 0 from Elseq 1. That it sounds the most like an experiment, like you were saying, and that's cool in the context of a 4-hour album. But yeah, I mean, so to sort of sum up feelings on Elseq 4, I feel like we've already sort of started to do that, but I want to note that like listener Tyler wrote in to say it's easily the best of the 5, and listener Steve calls it his favorite as well. Like I mentioned, it's the highest rated on Rate Your Music. I mean, is it just because it's a little more accessible, a little more fun, like normies love beats, as we like to say?
I think it's like if you're listening to each of these as individual records, it is the most like record sounding. I think like the thing that stops it from just sounding like a record is that Seventh Slip is such a odd thing to end on. So I get that. I get why it is, especially in those individual ratings. And I mean, you talked about it, the rating as a whole piece, like as the compilation, doesn't jive with the individual ratings. It's sort of overrated compared to that. So I think that the sort of person that's maybe individually rating them is thinking of them as 5 different records, and so that makes no surprise that the one that sounds most like an individual record would become the highest rated.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I mean it's more consistent, but not such high highs as I think some of the other, and maybe not even as daring and as experimental, aside from Seventh Slip, as some of the other Elseqs. All right, last but not least is Elseq 5, which, spoiler alert, is really my shit, I gotta say. How would you describe Elseq 5?
Yeah, it'll come as no surprise, but this also is my shit here. This is the laid back, ambient-ish record. We're fully going into this open space territory, letting things breathe. just sitting on things for a long time, like SPTH is just like the best groove for just eight minutes, like letting it ride out. I will say that I was driving with my wife, and I played Elseq 5, and I had the GPS going, so it wasn't, you couldn't see on the screen what it was. And she did not complain until I turned the GPS off and she saw what it was. And I said, I got you. I tricked you. I got you. She likes Autechre and Elseq 5.
yeah. There were a couple of tracks actually on Elseq 4 that I caught my, well, now she's my wife because we got married, but nodding her head to tracks without realizing it was Autechre. So they both got exposed in 4K, as the kids say. But yeah, I mean, this Elseq is like, yeah, it's so much more lush. And I think what's interesting, right, is like what we were talking about is how it kind of worked its way there organically, this whole record, right? So we started out with like such abrasive, noisy territory, but the sounds are mostly like pretty dry, especially we were talking about on LX6 Onset, like how dry it is and like just devoid of lushness entirely. And then, but you get like little hints throughout the record, like on Pendulou HV Moda from Elseq 1, like lots of lushness there. You get some like, lushness, like especially on like Elseq 4, it starts to pop in. Like there's some like droning ambience like in the background of like Latent Call and ACW or ACDWN2. And here it's just like kind of finally taken over to the point where by the last track of Elseq 5, it is like just nothing but the biggest wall of like lush strings, and I just love that about this Elseq. It's like, I don't know. It's a case where I basically starred the first 4 tracks here as like highlights of the entire project for me. Listener Joe says that Elseq 5 is just as amazing as Elseq 3 for him, writing, even though plenty of AE's music has been described as apocalyptic, this would probably be their best soundtrack to the end of the world. I love how well they use silence, emptiness, and space throughout this section. Pendulou Casual is one of their most minimalistic tracks, and SPTH sounds like an incredible follow-up to the mood and soundscape of Parhelic Triangle. Space is How V feels like a sequel to 1-1 Is and does a similar thing at the beginning where it has a repeating section that seems to expand larger and larger with some kind of reverb. It almost feels like some kind of hyper-advanced jazz piece with that melody that repeats at the beginning, a long breakdown section that feels very improvised and then goes back to the melody at the end. Frau Lau sounds like some kind of incredible track by An Act Like the Field, and then Onum ends the album with the sound of a star collapsing into a black hole. I love how it tricks us at the beginning into thinking that we're going to have some beautiful epic ambient closer like All End before all hell breaks loose for the next 10 minutes. Listener Jordan writes, something that would make me rank a song highly is a strange drum beat, and Frau Lau is that. When I put that on, the minutes just fly by. It has a dusty sound with an apocalyptic background noise, there's that word apocalyptic again, with wonderful popping sounds that just quietly pop. It has a great catchy rhythm. He adds, One is a great ending. I don't care if there's a longer version of it on NTS sessions. It's still great. So lots to unpack here. I mean, what are your favorite moments on Elseq 5?
I think SPTH is maybe my favorite track in Elseq. It's just like this awesome beat with like this crazy like noise drum that happens. It's just like combining the things I like so much.
It has like the craziest arrangement where it's like this, like the clacking is very small sounding, like very like light, and then those like big noise blasts sound like, again, cosmic scale. Like the fact that they're like on top of each other is so disorienting and bizarre, and those noise blasts are like, I can't wait for the next one every time.
No,
because it's like,
yeah, I know. You're
amazing how it's like just sounds interacting and like tangling and like just wild.
I know it's like your speakers exploding or something. It's the kind of thing I wish it was more than 820, because it's fairly unchanging. It's the kind of thing I could listen to for quite a while, because it is like nice, like anticipating those giant like blasts and everything. I just think it's probably my favorite of the entire series.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites of the entire series. I think actually my favorite track of the entire series is that Frau Lau, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, track 4, looks French or something or some shit, I don't know, but that is like unbelievable. It's like it's got like a 4 on the floor, almost kind of like techno quality. I was reminded of like Gas or The Field, like listener Joe mentioned. It's like pure techno and like ambient techno, and it's just gorgeous with like this, like, I don't know, just wall of like droney, like warmth. I mean, something we haven't mentioned enough about this album is like they play with the kind of atonal stuff a lot, but there are a lot of tracks where it's like there's no melody in the track necessarily, but everything is like pitched into a key. You know what I mean? So it's like all of the like beats and just all the noises and stuff. It feels like just sort of carefully crafted to make like this interesting, like a melodic, palette or something. And so I don't know, this is just like the most like beautiful moment on the whole record. And just like, I just love how it's like, it has that Gas kind of quality where it's like very, it's like got a lot of urgency, but at the same time, it feels like very still and just like motionless. I mean, I just can't get enough of that track.
Yeah, that's definitely a highlight for me too. It's just so cool, like you said. It's like this ambient techno track, but like through this Autechre lens,
Yeah.
And
they've never done anything like that.
No, really. Like I was trying to think back when I was listening to it today. If there was anything else like that, and I couldn't come up with anything.
I wanted to shout out also. I forgot to quiz you, but. Basically, the middle 3 tracks are all bolded, and the lowest rated is Pendulou Casual. I love that track. I mean, it feels like post techno or something, because it is like so aggressively minimalist. It's like just that lightest, like almost again with like the kind of cheap hi-hat sound from Elseq's onset, and like it's got like this kind of wubbing to it, but like slow motion crawl to the whole thing. I mean, again, it's like it's weird if you're thinking of Elseq 5 as like its own album, because it's a weird opener, but I don't know. It just feels like this is like Elseq 5 is like the time, maybe they were doing it on Elseq 4 with like electro, but this feels like they're kind of interrogating like electronic forms like techno, but like totally Autechreizing them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I love Pendulou Casual as well. It's just like it's so laid back, it's like it's just transfixing or something. I think Elseq 4 into 5 is like the best like going into each other kind of thing of the series too. Like Elseq 4 is the most upbeat party kind of thing, and then this is just the like this is the ride home, or the the afterwards, laying in bed or so, it's the come down kind of thing. I think I think it's like really proved that this is a journey from Elseq 1 all the way to 5, not just 5 random collections.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it enough, but like Wanium, I mean, it pulls off the thing that like XI kind of failed to do, and it was fine because in a strange way XI even worked better as separate parts, how it's supposed to kind of be like 12 inches. But we were talking about how like the last track on XI, like it doesn't really succeed in like wrapping up all of XI, because how could anything? And yet here, this like Wanium track, it feels like the cosmic singularity or something that the whole record has been like moving toward. And the way that Elseq 5 kind of gets like more droney and more ambient and kind of leads like right into Wanium, it's like it actually is like an amazing closer to this 4-hour experience.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it does pull off, I mean, the impossible. Closing a 4-hour record is difficult to do. Especially if you, I don't want to jump too much ahead, but like the way NTS closes is the easier way to close such a mammoth thing. I think Wanium is so interesting because it isn't just like a straight drone or something. It definitely it does have the like singularity quality, and I think it wraps up the project like very nicely.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's kind of like an endlessly fascinating like 11 minutes, because it's just like it feels like 50 layers of strings or something, but you can hear some of them like glitching and flickering and stuff like that, which is like kind of a cool mixture of the synthetic and the organic. And it just feels like it kind of like mellows out as it goes along, but it's almost like at first it's like too bright to look at, like you're looking right at the sun or something. It's like so big, this sound, but it just feels like so fitting for this huge experience we've been on. All right, so I think we can safely say that we both like Elseq 5 a whole lot, and we can start wrapping up. To do so, I want to return to the question of what Elseq is and how you're actually supposed to listen to it, even though maybe we've already answered it. But like The Wire, several listeners wrote in to say that AE sounds totally liberated by breaking with the traditional album format. Listener Colin wrote, it really sounds like what AE have been striving to achieve for their entire careers. On the other hand, listener Joe writes, I never feel satisfied listening to a full Elseq all the way through the way I do one of the XI 12 inches or one of the NTS sessions. And I think part of that has to do with something that you guys have brought up over and over again, format. I think that having to keep in mind things like the runtime of a CD or a side of vinyl helped Autechre to structure their releases in ways that worked wonderfully. I think that they went a bit too far off the rails here and were able to handle the complete freedom that the digital-only format gives to do whatever you want, and they ended up with a release that works in a way completely opposite to XI, not working particularly well as individual sections or as a coherent full release. He adds, editing Elseq down to an XI length release would have made it their best overall. What is your opinion on that, on the effect of format or lack thereof on Elseq, on the decision to divvy them up into 5 parts? What do you think?
I do agree with the listener that I think like the individual pieces of XI work better than the individual pieces of Elseq maybe, but I think Elseq as a whole works. You know, we talked about like I feel like it really does have this journey from feed 1 all the way to Oneium, which just now saying that they both have 1 in the name. Ooh, conspiracy. You know, but I mean, I feel like it's definitely obviously it's difficult to find time to listen to 4 hours right. in a go. But I felt like, you know, over these last 2 weeks of listening, I spent like some time, you know, this day I listened to Elseq 1, you know, next day Elseq 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, and try to think of them as individual. And then, you know, a handful of times I listened to all 4 hours, you know, in a go, you know, to take a break here and there, you know, or whatever. But I feel like I always enjoyed the one go kind of things. In fact, like today, you know, being the last day, I listened to the whole thing straight through. And it's just like a much more enjoyable experience. In fact, like I always had rated this on Rate Your Music just only as a one individual, you know, as the compilation. And I, over these 2 weeks, I tried to do each one individually. And I feel like I rank them individually less than, you know, I sort of agree with Rate Your Music in the sense that like individually, they come up shorter than as a whole, you know? I totally agree with that. I don't think any of them are like particularly fully satisfying on their own.
No, and I don't even think they're supposed to be.
No, exactly. You know, I tried to think about that, like at over the 2 weeks, like if this disc was the 12th Autechre record, like how would I feel? And yeah, there's none that I'm like, maybe 5, but I don't think 5 like works on its own as well as it does as a piece in this giant puzzle. I don't think.
And like, how weird would Oneium be as the closer of this 45-minute album? It's too so grand. Epic.
Yeah, it's too grand. It would be, you know, it hasn't like deserved it yet, you know.
Right.
But after 4 hours, it 100% deserves it. So I think it's just it's too difficult to break down. I really wonder why they split it into 5, but it seems like from those interviews, like maybe they don't even know.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's strange. I hate to say it, but it almost feels like they just weren't ready to fully commit to, you know, a 4-hour album. So they had to.
I mean, I think they're just like, we've talked about it before, but they're like kind of nice guys. Like they want to make it not so hard on us. I feel like like they want to release big projects, but they want to like help you through it. And XI kind of beautifully gets like cut into 4s, and it's actually really helpful to listen to it that way. Here I feel like it's almost detrimental to think of it as 5 individual pieces. It just like needs to keep going. And I found myself like over these past 2 weeks, I was like, okay, today I'm going to focus on Elseq 1 or something like, and I would try to do it, and I would just find myself like instinctively, I would go to this playlist I made where I just put them all together and just like putting it on somewhere and like not stopping it. Like I didn't, you know what I mean? I never felt like the urge to stop it. I just wanted it to keep on going all the way to the end of Elseq 5.
Yeah, I like purposely didn't put them in a playlist like that so that I wouldn't do that, because I felt the same way. I like had to purposely, say I'm on Elseq 1 today or whatever,
Yeah. Well, here's something kind of on the topic. Listener Tyler writes, when Elseq came out, I was fully entrenched in my attitude of buying music in physical formats only and was certain that if I waited long enough, Elseq would get a physical release. So I didn't buy it and I didn't listen. I'm less set in that mindset now, which is why I finally caved and listened. Although I have to admit, I'm still really disappointed there's no physical release available. Surely I'm not the only one in this boat. Why have they been so resistant to physically release this album, even if it were CD only? I mean, it might be that they honestly like regret breaking it up or something. I mean, I know that's like a little much to assume, but like, does it annoy you that they don't just go ahead and give it a CD or like a box set release or something? Or do you feel like it almost makes sense?
I think it's just, I don't know. Did NTS get released on CD at all? I feel like there's not enough people buying CDs to, a 5 CD box set is gonna cost a lot of money, and there's probably just not a big enough market for it. I buy records, and I wish that this was available. I have the NTS box set and stuff, but it also it doesn't really fit on discs cleanly in the order that it's in here. Like Elseq 2. You'd have a hard time getting that on a disc, ELYC6 onset, like 27 minutes. You can jam that on one side of a disc, but you're gonna lose some fidelity and bass and everything. What was that Todd Rundgren record? Something about Wizard.
A Wizard, a True Star.
Yeah. It's like an hour jammed onto one disc, and it's. I've never listened to that record on vinyl, but honestly, I always do sort of keep an eye out for it because I want to hear how awful it sounds. Because you're gonna lose some of that fidelity here, and you can argue, well, they split up all in onto several discs. They only had to do it with one track. That's a whole another argument.
Yeah. They could do it, but it would like cause even more problems than like dividing it already has. I feel like it would just make it even more choppy and like less satisfying in different pieces. Like you want to make this into even more individual pieces.
It just wouldn't work well on vinyl. Like I think like had they had the intention to release it on vinyl from the outset, they could have made it where it fit better and then done it. But I think maybe they didn't come into it with the intention to put it on vinyl, and so it doesn't fit. Yeah. And then now, just because a lot of people would like it still just doesn't fit. Because I hate when record like Swans the Seer, like the track listing is all mixed around on vinyl because it doesn't fit in the order.
Right.
And it's like I have it, because I just have all the Swans records. But it's like I don't really like to honestly listen to that on vinyl because it's not the album the way it's intended. So I think Elseq,
so it would be unsatisfying.
Yeah, it would just become for collector. We're not to bring up Flaming Lips again, but it would just be in that sort of collector thing.
Couldn't resist getting another little dig in.
No, I had to.
Lips. So I want to note that Tyler said he would rank the installments as 4, 3, 5, 1, 2. And listener Joe says Elseq's 3 and 5 have a nice identity and a flow. Elseq's 1 and 4 are more hit and miss. And Elseq 2 is actively bad. I feel like we've hashed it out a lot about like, it's not that great maybe to even bother ranking them. But, did you have any temptation over the course of these 2 weeks, like, on our running rankings of all the stuff we've talked about, that they should be rated separately?
I asked you, basically to make sure, so that I wouldn't not do it, and then you did do it. But no, like I said, I've always sort of thought of it as one piece. I've always only had Elseq 1 to 5 as a compilation, like rated in my Rate Your Music, until this week, like just as a experiment or whatever. So I don't really want to, I never really like thought we should rank them individually or anything. It definitely feels like, I mean, honestly, I usually to myself just refer to it as Elseq. I tend to not think of the 1 to 5.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has to be all together. Like, it just has to be. So that being said, where did it end up on your running ranking?
I put it at number 7, right below Confield and or right above Confield and right below Choristus.
Wow. I put it at number 5, right below Confield and right above Untilted. I don't know, the way you were talking about it, I was thinking it might be a little higher. Why can't you get any higher than 7?
I honestly, coming into it, as we were coming into this episode, I thought, this has got a chance of, disrupting the list kind of, but maybe it had to do with breaking it into the individual pieces. But I think I came away at the end of these 2 weeks liking this a little less than I used to.
Wow.
Which definitely surprised me. I still like it a lot. I did realize that there are some like issues with it. There's some tracks that don't flow together super well. There's more issues with it than I thought there were.
Yeah, I mean, I feel confident in saying that like most of the tracks have like a clear identity and are sort of memorable, like a shocking amount for how long this thing is. Like, I can look at it and immediately I remember which one it is and everything, despite the weird track titles as always. But like at the same time, a lot of them they're like kind of memorable and interesting for being like weird failed experiments, like I'm glad that they exist, but stuff like Seventh Slip or like, even C7B2 and stuff, it's like they're cool and interesting and honestly fascinating, but they're just like weird, aborted, like strange things that would have been left on the cutting room floor if the whole idea of this project wasn't like just giving you everything. And I appreciate having everything to wade through, but I said at the beginning how I felt like I never have spent enough time with Elseq, despite spending a shit ton of time with it, honestly, over the last couple of years. And I still feel like at the end of these 2 weeks, like I haven't spent enough time with it. And I think that's because ultimately a lot of parts of this are just like, not fully developed. Like it's hard. There's nothing to get fully because it's just sort of like a strange detour.
No, I felt the same way, like certain tracks, I felt that I didn't remember, like Keimer 151 and stuff, it was like, I felt like maybe I wasn't getting those ones yet and still needed some time or whatever. But I think you're right. Those are just sort of the things that would have been left behind in a more normal, release. And so there is nothing to get. I think too why, like I said, like I came away from this, maybe liking the album a little less than I did before, is I think I really love like the idea of Elseq, like this huge, massive, like 4-hour, unrelenting, like unforgiving, kind of thing. And when you break it down and stuff, it's not that as much, there is like, it is memorable and like enjoyable to listen to and stuff, which like, surprises me for such a 4-hour thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, there are moments like I found myself feeling like, on like Elseq 4 in particular, like we were talking about, but it kind of pops up here and there where it's like, this is like kind of just a bop, like it's not like some tracks, they're like kind of pushing the envelope as far as they possibly can about like being experimental and like going places nobody's ever gone before. Other times, like they're just straight up bopping, like electro grooving, and it all works as far as like a mixed bag goes. But when you're talking about a mixed bag, I'm not gonna be able to get like a mixed bag at number 1.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I didn't realize how much of a mixed bag it is, I think. Before spending so much time.
All right, well, you want to just count down your top 10 real quick?
Yeah, number 10, we got Incunabula, EP7, Confield, Elseq, Chloristus Amber at number 5, LP5 at number 4, XI at 3, Chiastic Slide at 2, and Trirepate at number 1.
And I've got a number 10 Gans Graph, Sickly Sweet, Amber, Chloristus, Untilted, Elseq 1 through 5, Confield, Chiastic Slide, Trirepate, and XI. And I guess I should clarify that, I mean, it's still made my top 5 Elseq, and I think that's because the highs are so freaking high. Like there's like 5 tracks here that I think are like absolute all-timers, and it's like those high highs that you know make it so memorable for me, but like the lows that you know keep it from being like a all number one type of thing. All right, we did it. We made it all the way through Elseq.
Yeah, not quite as long as I thought maybe it would be. You know, I was a little worried.
It's about half the time it takes to listen to Elseq.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was worried we'd go, you know, my bedtime's coming up. I was wondering, I was a little worried, but yeah, we did it. What do you think about Elseq 1 to 5? We're doing another listener email episode next week, so send us your thoughts. GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. Next proper episode in 2 weeks. NTS 1 and 2. Most likely we haven't figured it out 100% yet. We want your opinions and hot takes. GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Look us up on YouTube. Stay connected to Twitter, Instagram. Those are @GONKCASTpod, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.